Donald Trump promised global peace and stability. But with the world mired in conflicts, does he have a plan for peace? Or is he simply lying to grab attention and the most coveted Nobel Peace Prize? You know, real peace isn't just about getting people to stop shooting for a little while. It's about dealing with the actual roots of conflict. Things like sovereignty, justice, dignity, and security. That's what separates what philosophers call negative peace, the temporary quiet of a ceasefire, from positive peace, the kind that actually heals wounds and keeps violence from coming back. But Trump doesn't seem too interested in that deeper version. For him, peace is more like a business deal. Get the leaders in a room, push them into a handshake, slap a flashy name on it, and call it a win. It's peace as a photo op, not real progress. Sure, the ceremonies look slick, the branding is catchy, and the headlines are glowing, but the big issues, the ones that actually matter, get left unresolved. So in the end, Trump isn't really ending wars. He's just hitting pause long enough to take the credit, treating global conflicts like one of his real estate projects. All shown on the outside, with nothing solid underneath. Trump promised to end the Russia-Ukraine conflict once in the Oval Office. He hosted Zelensky in the Oval Office, tried to negotiate with Putin, and even invited him to a meeting in Alaska, where he was given a warm welcome with a fly past, but to no avail. At present, the war is still raging, and Trump appears to have given up on his pursuit of peace, telling Zelensky instead that he can cripple the Russian economy to checkmate. When Donald Trump unveiled the Armenia-Azerbaijan peace roadmap in August 2025, he cast himself as the ultimate dealmaker, bringing two bitter enemies together in Washington under his watch. With Aliyev and Pashinyan standing beside him, Trump promised that this was not just another handshake, but the start of a new era of stability in the Caucasus. And yet this arrangement is falling apart, with reservations rising from both camps and in the region. Donald Trump has also thrust himself into the center of the Israel-Palestine war, unveiling a sweeping 20-point plan in September 2025 that he claimed would bring peace and safety to both sides. The proposal called for an immediate ceasefire, the release of hostages, the disarmament of Hamas, and a transitional governance structure in Gaza. Israel quickly embraced the plan, seeing it as aligned with its security demands, but Palestinians and many Arab governments dismissed it as one-sided, arguing that it ignored the core issue of Palestinian statehood. On the ground, the war rages on. Israeli airstrikes continue in Gaza. Hamas remains entrenched, and humanitarian conditions are catastrophic. For Trump, the plan was another chance to present himself as the master negotiator. But much like his Caucasus deal, it risks becoming more of a political showpiece than a viable blueprint for lasting peace. When you look closely, Trump's peace strategy reveals a consistent pattern. Flashy announcements, hastily made deals, and zero real resolution of the core issues. Observers note that Trump's Gaza peace proposal isn't really a roadmap at all. Instead, it's more of a back-of-the-envelope sketch, as The Guardian put it. The plan strings together a series of ambitious promises like Israel's phased withdrawal from Gaza, the disarmament of Hamas, international oversight of aid and reconstruction. But the details are deliberately vague. Most of the obligations fall on the Palestinians, while Israel's commitments are conditional and elastic. For example, Israel's withdrawal is tied to security benchmarks, defined entirely on its own terms, meaning Tel Aviv can indefinitely delay or scale back its obligations. By writing the deal in such broad strokes, Trump creates the illusion of balance, while in practice handing Israel the power to interpret, delay, or walk away from key provisions. For Palestinians, this feels less like a peace plan and more like a trap when they're asked to give up weapons, political leverage, and territorial control, while Israel gains international legitimacy for its security demands without having to concede on statehood, sovereignty, or occupation. In effect, Trump is deceiving the world with optics while betraying Palestine with substance. He presents himself as the master negotiator who brought peace to Gaza, but the actual blueprint entrenches Israeli dominance and leaves the core Palestinian demand. Recognition of their statehood completely off the table. What Trump brands as historic peace looks, on closer inspection, like a carefully staged performance designed to appease Israel, dazzle the media, and erase Palestinian rights under the guise of diplomacy. Even inside Israel, the plan met harsh pushback. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich called it a diplomatic failure and warned that children will be forced to fight in Gaza again. In other words, even Trump's closest allies couldn't quite buy into the illusion. And that's the point. Trump's peace initiatives tend to look impressive at first glance. These are grand promises, big stages, dramatic headlines, but the closer you examine them, the more they unravel. Nowhere is this clearer than in the Caucasus. In the Armenia-Azerbaijan peace deal, Trump managed to put his own stamp on the agreement in a way that only he could. He branded the main transit corridor linking Armenia, Azerbaijan, and regional markets as the Trump route for international peace and prosperity, or TRIPP for short. It was marketed as a grand vision of trade, connectivity, and mutual benefit, with Trump promising that the U.S. would act as a neutral overseer to guarantee safe passage and economic growth along the route. But behind the branding, the fine print raised eyebrows. The agreement granted the United States 99-year development rights over the corridor, essentially locking in American influence in the Caucasus for an entire century. To Trump, this was proof of his deal-making genius. America gains leverage, the region gains stability, and he cements his legacy as a peacemaker. Critics, however, saw something very different. To them, this wasn't confidence in the peace process. It was strategic ambition disguised as diplomacy. By tying the corridor to U.S. oversight, Trump effectively turned the deal into a geopolitical tool, a way to project American power into the Caucasus, sideline Russia, and pressure Iran, which has already voiced open hostility to the project. In other words, the trip corridor looks less like a bridge of reconciliation and more like a wedge of influence. For Azerbaijan, it offered a chance to strengthen its regional role. For Armenia, it raised new fears of sovereignty being chipped away. And for the U.S., it was another example of Trump's peace being less about solving conflicts and more about repackaging them into platforms for American dominance. When it comes to Ukraine, Trump's rhetoric about ending the war in 24 hours sounds bold, but the reality underneath tells a different story. For Washington, and especially under Trump's framing, the war is less about peace and more about profit and leverage. The United States has become Ukraine's largest arms supplier, with American defense companies seeing record profits as Europe scrambles to rearm. Every new Russian offensive means another wave of U.S. military aid packages, which often come bundled with conditions tying European security ever closer to Washington. This isn't just about supporting Kyiv, it's about making sure Europe remains strategically dependent on American protection. NATO allies are pressured to buy U.S. weapons systems, from Patriot missiles to F-16 fighter jets, locking them into long-term contracts that strengthen the American military-industrial complex. Meanwhile, Trump can posture as both Ukraine's would-be savior and Europe's indispensable protector, all while painting himself as the deal-maker who holds the keys to ending the conflict. But here's the irony. While the U.S. reaps profits, Putin isn't exactly losing out either. By keeping Russia in a permanent state of war footing, Putin has been able to crush dissent, silence opposition, and rally nationalist support at home, turning the conflict into a tool for political survival. At the same time, he continues to pressure Europe with energy, manipulating flows of gas and oil even under sanctions to keep parts of the continent vulnerable. Far from being isolated, Moscow has also forged new alliances, with sanctions pushing it closer to China, Iran, and other non-Western partners, creating alternative markets and parallel financial systems. And as the war drags on, Putin benefits from bleeding the West slowly. Ukraine drains billions in Western aid each year, U.S. weapons stockpiles are stretched thinner, and Europe faces mounting political divisions over whether indefinite support is sustainable. At the end of the day, Donald Trump's foreign policy legacy isn't about resolving conflicts, it's about staging them. His version of peace is less about building bridges and more about building brands. Whether it's the Trip Corridor in the Caucasus, the flashy Gaza blueprint, or his sweeping promises on Ukraine, the pattern is always the same: dramatic announcements, carefully crafted optics, and short-term applause. But beneath the surface, the core issues like sovereignty, justice, security, dignity remain unaddressed. This is the essence of negative peace. It's quiet on the surface, but the grievances underneath remain unresolved, waiting to explode with even greater intensity later on. Trump doesn't grapple with the roots of war. He tries to freeze them just long enough for a photo op. For Palestinians, that means being asked to disarm and surrender leverage without any guarantee of statehood. For Armenians, it means sacrificing sovereignty under the guise of U.S. oversight for Europe. It means buying into an endless cycle of dependency on American weapons and security guarantees. And yet, while Trump claims the mantle of peacemaker, others profit from the chaos he fails to resolve. U.S. defense contractors cash in on Ukraine's endless war. Putin strengthens his grip at home, pressures Europe, and deepens ties with China and Iran. In this sense, Trump's peace is not only shallow in reality, it actively sustains the very conflicts it's supposed to end. So the question isn't whether Trump can bring peace, it's whether what he calls peace is even peace at all. Because without justice, sovereignty, and dignity, what he offers the world is little more than a fragile pause, actually a ceasefire, dressed up as a deal. And as history shows, pauses always end.